Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dhammaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. Dutiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Dhammaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. Tatiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Dhammaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. So I hope that everybody's keeping well wherever might be. And I've come down here to Ovāda, which is a hot and dry portion of Sri Lanka. And I've just been doing some traveling around and looking at places to stay. Maybe looking at some kutis and hoping to see what's available in this hotter, drier climate, which is kind of up my alley. So a couple days ago now, the resident monks here, who've been very kind to me and helping me a lot, took me to see a kuti, which is about 4 kilometers from here. And it's a very beautiful cave kuti. In Sri Lanka they have these ancient caves. I mean, all caves are ancient, they're made of rock, but these are ancient in the sense that they were inhabited by monks possibly thousands of years ago. And you can kind of tell that monks used to live there because what they do is they take these natural kind of lean-tos in the rock and they chisel a drip ledge out of the edge of the cliff face, where the cliff face starts to turn inwards. And then often as well, they'll kind of inscribe the name of the donor or what the cave was donated for, type of thing, at the top, above the drip ledge or on the roof of the cave sometimes. They'll say, you know, the donor so-and-so donates this to the Mahasangha, and sometimes they'll even say he's, you know, the cavalry officer's brother or something like this. So this particular cave is located in there's this really huge forest just behind this cave area, and it just goes on and on and on. It's an enormous forest actually, and very hot and dry, and above the cave is this kind of beautiful lookout. So it's actually a really stunning location. And when one goes into the forest, actually, when one goes into these deeper forest areas, there's almost like this thermocline. So as young men in Canada, I used to like to do what they call skin diving. And it means you basically hold your breath as long as you can and you dive down in the lakes or the ponds even, but I guess mostly the lakes in Canada. And in Canada, because the country is so cold, oops, let me adjust this. Because the country is so cold, there we are, that's better. Because the country is so cold, the water at the top level of the lake is heated by the sun. And it's warmer than the waters below it, sometimes significantly. But something strange happens in that there's this separation of the temperatures in the water, and that the very first portion of the water is warmer and you'll be diving down there, and then there'll be this sudden change to a less warm layer, and then maybe even another one, a sudden change to an even less warm layer. So I don't think it usually lasts that long, because below a certain distance, I mean, the water is going to be, you know, relatively the same temperature unless one goes really, really deep. So when one is going into the forest, there can also be these kind of thermoclines. So in silence, you'll be walking into a forest area, and you're in a village area on the outskirts of a forest, and you know, it's a certain amount of silence. But as one goes along, one starts to realize, oh, the village is farther away, and the perception of village can fall away from the mind to a certain extent, and there's a silence to that. And one goes even further, and there's even more of a physical silence to that. There's a solitude. And the energy of something like that can help to push the mind inwards, can help to make the mind have a feeling of being alone, a feeling of quiet. And all of this is really conducive to meditation. So in this forest going in, you can one can notice these kind of thermoclines going into this forest towards this cave. And when one gets to the cave as well, it's a very silent place. So there's often these kind of competing energies, you might say, in the places where one might meditate. And it's kind of, in a village, there's a particular energy to the place. I mean, people are doing what they do in villages, and what they're doing in villages, or what they're doing in most human societies, is people are looking for happiness in external things. On the more wholesome level, it might be in relationships with family and friends that are in line with the Dhamma, but there's many other ways that people can also look for happiness that are not wholesome. And what this does is it creates a particular energy to a place. It creates a particular perception to a place. And that energy, that perception to a place, affects the way that one's mind turns. It's almost like a flow. So if you get in a river and the river flows in a particular direction, then you can be carried along with that stream. If you're discerning, you'll ask, where is this flow going? And if it's going in the wrong direction, you'll try to go a different way. But if a flow is going one way and you want to go a different way, it means you're going against the stream, going upstream while the stream is going down, going in an opposite direction. And what this means is you're going to be fighting a current. So the energy that you expend has to equal the energy that the stream is pushing back plus more. If you're going the same direction as the stream, then the energy that you expend, it is actually a bonus to the energy that's already being put forth in the stream. So going into a place where there's a thermocline and silence like this in the forest is like going with the stream to a certain extent. The energy of that forest pushes one's mind inwards. The perception of village falls away. It's just this perception of wilderness. You know that you're alone. And the push in that direction is inwards. So when I was a young man, I used to go on these Zen retreats. And there'd be maybe 20 or 30 people. And on these retreats, there would be a kind of energy. There's like a group energy when you meditate with many different people. And that energy is a support. It can help to push a person's mind inwards. And it's noticeable. Kind of you're there with the group. It's much easier to meditate than when one is alone. And this particular Zen temple was actually located in a really busy street in Toronto and right across from like a nefarious after-hours nightclub. Right near a really busy intersection, and the meditation hall is right next to this parking lot. So you would get a lot of noise coming from this parking lot, but still there was a really good support from all these people meditating. And later I went up to go camping at Algonquin several years later, I think 3-4 years later maybe, and we went up to the northern part of Algonquin, which is less used, and remember going to this dock at the edge of the campgrounds, the edge of the places where you could drive into park, and doing some meditation there. And there's a support here too. There's a support in this silence. So there's a couple of things that one can take away from this. One is, of course, that wilderness is a support, but also that there's these places in the cities that are supports too. A lot depends on what people are doing there. If they're meditating there, then there's a flow to that. They're creating a pocket, an alternative society, an alternative pocket of energy, and the flow of that energy is going against the flow that's generally there in the city. I remember this temple was actually in this old Ukrainian Federation credit union, or old Ukrainian community center, and it was this almost Soviet era, old concrete building. And it was used after the Ukrainian community had sold it or maybe just abandoned it. It was actually like a derelict building almost. And it was used for these nightclubs and raves. These all-night parties where people were doing a lot of drugs. So the energy there, of course, would not be that good. It would not have been the best place to practice. But after they'd set the temple up there and people had been meditating there for a long time, then people would comment that when they came in, there's a different feel to this place. You can feel what it's like here. It's what people have been doing there. And the push that's there. There's there's an energetic aspect to it, but there's also a perception aspect to it. And when you go to the temple, you automatically perceive that the people around are going to be quiet, that they're going to be restrained, that they're going to be virtuous, and this automatically puts quiet and virtue and restraint into the mind. It makes one's mind incline in those directions. So one can consider carefully, not just in terms of the people one associates with, but the places one associates with. And one can learn to become sensitive to the direction, to the flow that this place is pushing one in. And how much energy does one have to expend to go against that? I'm staying in this one place where it was one of the most difficult places I've ever been to practice, and just very hard to practice there, and not because the conditions were hard. And later learned that the person who'd set it up was actually this really, really immoral person. Actually, he was kind of a Buddhist, but he just lie all the time, and was an immoral man as well as being a faithful man. His faith and immorality coexisted in him. And this place was really unconducive. It could be quite unconducive to practice in terms of the slog that one had to put forth. It was like, why is this place, why is it that this is the case? So this can be one of the reasons. You perceive that what you're doing is going against the grain of the people around you. And they perceive what's going on in that place. It can make them uncomfortable. If they feel that they have to be quiet when a monk is around, if they feel that they have to be restrained when a monk is around, and what they want is to be not quiet and not restrained, then that causes friction. Right? They don't want to do that, and you're in close proximity. There's this kind of bubble that's around that. You're creating this kind of alternative culture in that particular area. It causes friction, and they don't like it. So in those kind of situations, you can end up with all kinds of different issues that arise because you're making the people in the village uncomfortable. So one wants to be very selective, or try to be very selective about the places that one goes to practice. And it's not always the case that it's such a surefire and easy thing to do. And sometimes you meet these people, as there was this one fellow I met recently, and he would go off into these he went to this place that was in this really deep forest, and the place sounded nice actually. It sounded impressive. The monks there would do a lot of walking meditation, and they just sleep open on this open rock and don't really even use kutis, and even don't have bathrooms there. Just is very basic infrastructure. But he would go there and he would come back very proud and almost talking he was be bragging. And then I watched what he was doing. He was spending a lot of time bragging to people and talking to them about what this place was like. And then I would question him, well, what did you do when you were there? I was like, I walked meditation for 3 hours. And I was like, well, what else did you do? And it turns out he was spending, maybe 5 hours a day talking, just engaging in idle chatter. And then coming back from the forest very, very proud and conceited and vain. So just going to a forest in and of itself and doing difficult things in and of themselves is not something that is necessarily going to be conducive to the practice if one grasps it wrongly. So all the time the perception in mind, the goal that we have to have in mind is that we're doing this for the sake of developing in the Buddhist path. We're doing this for the sake of moving forward in wholesome qualities. There's actually an important sutta in the Anguttara Nikaya that's very little known. It's called the Darukamika Sutta. And in this sutta, there's a man who comes up to the Buddha, somehow the Buddha and he end up meeting. And the Buddha says, are gifts, just paraphrasing, are gifts given in your householder? And he says, yes, my gifts are given in my household. They're given to those who are arahants, those who are forest dwellers, those who are rag robe wearers, those who are almsgoers, those who are triple robe wearers, all these things together. And the Buddha says, householder, it's not easy for you, living in a house crowded with children and basically using sandalwood and, beautiful cloths to tell who's an arahant and who isn't, and who's on the path to arahantship and who isn't. He says, if a bhikkhu lives in the forest and he's vain, conceited, he's puffed up, and he's rambling in his talk, loose in his talk, muddle-minded, lacks clear comprehension, then in that respect he's blameworthy. And the opposite, if he's living in a forest and he's clear-minded, he's not vain, he's concise in his speech and limited in his speech, basically, and he's concentrated. Basically, that's a bhikkhu who's praiseworthy in that respect. And it goes through for the alms robe wearer, for the rag robe wearer, all these different things. If you live in a village and you have clear comprehension, you're not vain, you're not speaking idly, rambling in your talk, and you have concentration, then you're praiseworthy in that respect. So all of the time, what one wants to look for in the places where one goes to practice is the stream of this place leading me in this direction? Is it leading me towards these qualities? Because in addition to the energy of the place, this can be something very individual, actually. It can have a lot to do with the ways in which one gels with that environment and gels with the people in that environment. Because different people adapt well to different circumstances, and different people, their characters are well suited to certain circumstances. So what it means is that one has to look for these qualities in the way in which they grow in one's own mind, rather than the ways in which the world praises the place in which one is going to practice. This is something very important. Actually, people praise places that are difficult, praise places that are hard, praise places and become impressed by places that are very remote. And as we talked about, these places can be very conducive. They have these thermoclines and silence. However, inside of these places, there's variations. I stayed at one cave kuti for Vasa, and this cave kuti looked very impressive on a map where it was, but actually it was located below this temple, and the temple was always playing music, and then it was located near this village, and the villagers were always playing music in this particular village. So it was actually not that quiet of a place. And staying in this place, what actually ended up happening was I actually ended up getting kind of quite sick. The cave itself, caves are not always the most easy places for me to stay. I tend to like to stay in open spaces, where you can see far and there's very good airflow. And caves are kind of cold and can be a little bit damp and very dark places. So some people like that. So when people look at where you staying in this cave, it also had this large rock with this amazing vista, and everybody who came to this kuti was really impressed. They were impressed with the place, and then sometimes they'd become impressed with me because I was living in this place like this. However, the place was not conducive to growing in wholesome qualities. It was the cave was, I didn't find that my health was improving there. It was very noisy. More noisy than some kutis in the village, actually, because of this temple above, and sometimes because of the amount of partying that the villagers in this particular village like to do. So this is one of the bigger obstacles and bigger temptations that one faces as a meditator looking for good places to go. It's actually the praise or the dispraise that people give you for staying in particular places. It's very easy to come up with a checklist. Oh, it's very deep in the forest, it's whatever it is, and then people will praise based on that. If it doesn't meet the checklist, then they will sometimes dispraise, or they'll sometimes be uninterested. But all the time, the foremost thing in one's own mind has to be, am I growing in the qualities which the Buddha recommended? Am I becoming less vain, less puffed up? My talk becoming less rambling? Am I gaining more clear comprehension? And people can ask, is my mind becoming concentrated? In other words, am I moving forward in the wholesome qualities that the Buddha recommends on the path? So there are these energies to places. There are these aspects to places where the energy of the place, the environment surrounding the place can be like a stream that pushes one forward in one's practice. The amount of effort that one puts forward is already going to be a bonus on top of the flow that's pushing one forward in that place. And so one can learn to be sensitive to this. In the wrong place, it's like the amount of effort one puts forth has to be above and beyond the flow that's pushing against one. But these can also be individual things. It can have a lot to do with whether or not one's mind matches with that place, with the people in the place. It can have a lot to do with whether one's health is improving or declining in that place. But when all these factors come together, when one finds a place that's suitable to stay, where one's growing in these wholesome qualities, and one should associate with that place, one should associate it with it for the sake of growing in these same wholesome qualities, because actually that's what leads to happiness in one's path, is the growing of these wholesome qualities. So whatever the world praises or doesn't praise about a place where one stays, about the places or the people that one associates with, one has to have foremost in mind one's goals in the Dhamma, because these are the things that lead one's onwards to what one is really looking for, which is the cessation of suffering. Okay, so leave that for reflection, and wishing everybody all the blessings of Dhamma practice.